Hey, it's Scot Bertram, and I want to tell you about something new from Hillsdale College. It's the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. Check it out right now. Go to podcast.hillsdale.edu. The Hillsdale College Podcast Network offers free nationwide access to all of Hillsdale's podcast content. That means shows like the Hillsdale Dialogues, the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, the Larry P. Arn Show, and now, new, the Imprimis Podcast. You can listen wherever you are and whenever you want, and it's always free. Find out more about all of our shows at podcast.hillsdale.edu. You can subscribe to any program with new episodes delivered right to your device, or sign up for the super feed. That means you get access to absolutely everything posted on the site. If you want to come close to stepping inside a Hillsdale College classroom, well, the Hillsdale College Podcast Network is for you. Get informed and get entertained at podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're talking with Ben Boyle, student in the Graduate School of Classical Education at Hillsdale College. Ben, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate you having me on.
I want to talk a little bit about your experience in the graduate school and some other questions about education, but you're also a 2020 Hillsdale College graduate. So you found out about Hillsdale how? The first time?
The first time, well, I had my grandparents have been big fans of Hillsdale for a while, so I kind of first learned about it through them. But being homeschooled in high school, I was interested in kind of continuing the kind of education I had received, which was classical in nature. And so I visited Hillsdale on a few occasions, had the opportunity to sit in on some great books class, and I was sold pretty quickly. So I applied, got in, and was very excited to attend. So
I do want to ask a bit about those transitions, because your educational background, you've moved from a classical Christian co-op to homeschool to Hillsdale College for undergraduate, and now back to Hillsdale for graduate school. Did all that feel natural and smooth for you, those transitions?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I was in public school through my elementary years, but my parents and I were kind of just dissatisfied with the education I was receiving. So through some friends, we had kind of heard about small classical co-op. We didn't know too much about classical education at the time, but were definitely interested in it from what we knew. And so I joined through kind of my middle school years, 6th through 8th. And I had always been kind of like a STEM-focused kid in the sense that I loved math, I loved science, but I had a renewed kind of interest in the humanities while I was there, while continuing and, obviously progressing in math. So I was kind of, I loved the literature that we were reading. It was something that I hadn't experienced at school before, reading things like Tolkien, Beowulf, Shakespeare. I was entranced. So after kind of those years were done, that the school went up through 8th grade, we were able to kind of still work with a lot of the teachers who I had there. My parents knew like kind of the importance of those good teachers. And so I had a lot of similar teachers with a few other people that we would kind of get together, once or twice a week. Luckily, I was able to have some great books education in high school as well. And so the transition to Hillsdale kind of felt natural to me, continuing on in the sort of path I had been going on.
And you've mentioned previously that Dante and his work and encountering Dante's work was very influential for the way you approached and what you wanted to get out of education. How would you describe that kind of influence on you and your educational life?
Yeah, so I had very minimal encounters with medieval literature prior to high school when I was doing my great books curriculum. And I remember reading Dante for the first time. I was just kind of amazed and astounded just by the kind of the being able to put in these this moral kind of philosophy and theology, while also staying true to these kind of metaphysical realities, and just the really kind of exercise the contemplative faculty for me. I had always been, very interested in the kind of logical, deductive kind of side of things, but encountering that for the first time, it really encouraged me to just contemplate the beauty of like the whole synthesis that Dante had been able to put together in his Divine Comedy, kind of uniting the whole cosmos together, taking a journey through all of that at once, seeing the kind of the moral realities, him really exploring the nature of sin and also of human excellence, what that looks like. So I think for me, that was kind of opening up my moral imagination, as well as allowing me to see kind of outside of just the really limited historical contexts that I think a lot of us are kind of tempted to be stuck in. So for me, that opened a lot of doors to just be able to kind of see the trajectory of Western civilization as a whole, to be able to see the continuity, and to be able to just kind of love what's good and what's beautiful. I think that really opened doors for me intellectually, and I greatly appreciate it. And still love reading Dante to this day, of course.
Ben Boyle is with us. He's a student in the Graduate School of Classical Education at Hillsdale College. After graduating from Hillsdale in 2020, you did go and teach. What were your experiences that first year? I talked to a lot of teachers as part of this podcast, and almost to a person, they say that first year, it's really hard. It's really difficult. You don't quite know exactly what you're getting into until it's in front of you, and then you got to deal with it throughout the course of the year. How did you find that first year of teaching?
Yeah, it was definitely difficult, but also fruitful. So there's, aspects of teaching that you can prepare, get the philosophical basis for everything you're doing, but some of it just has to be learned by experience. And so that first year is a crash course in that. So I was teaching seventh grade language arts in Texas history being, of course, very, very new to me, not being from Texas originally. So that was a great fun being able to kind of learn and be able to kind of pass that on to the students. But it was obviously a difficult year. It was the 2020 to 2021. I think a lot of teachers experienced some change up. But for me, that was my first year teaching. So it was all new to me anyways. But something that I think was really worthwhile for me, being on kind of the other side of things. I'd been the student and kind of classical side of things, but I'd never been a teacher before. So there was a lot of learning, a lot of growth, a lot of kind of difficulty and just getting used to it. But ultimately, if you love what you're teaching, you love what you're doing. So I was glad to be able to do it. And, I look forward to doing it, more in the future. So.
And then you are part of this first cohort of students for the Graduate School of Classical Education at Hillsdale College. Why were you interested in, first, the opportunity, the possibility? Why did you decide to apply? And what interested you about what you might be able to learn in this graduate school?
Yeah, so I had learned about its existence through Dr. Copeland, the head of the program. And I was interested in, I think, for two major reasons. The first is just a very natural, I think, human one, is that if you love liberal education, if you participate in that, you understand that liberal education is a lifelong thing. So there's always a desire to be able to keep learning, to be able to kind of grasp at a more general understanding at all times, to be able to kind of synthesize all that you know. So that's something that I think everybody who's liberally educated is interested in. But secondly, I think during my time teaching, I had become just really more interested in the deeper philosophical and historical roots of classical education, and kind of recognized something of a kind of lacking in my knowledge of like what really is the foundational basis for what we're doing. What does it look like? What does it look like historically? And so I saw this as an opportunity to be able to kind of get at that kind of those kind of foundational elements. And so, I mean, I think if you're interested in educational leadership, experience is certainly something that's good to have, but also having that kind of more general knowledge and understanding is something that's very important for being able to pursue that. So thinking in my future, interested in educational leadership, I wanted to be able to have a fuller understanding of that. And so this program seemed like the perfect opportunity for me to pursue that. And I was very excited when I learned about it. Went through the application process as quickly as I could, putting everything together. And so far it's lived up to it. So I've been very blessed and happy to be able to be a part of it.
How would you describe this first year that just wrapped up? What are the sort of things that you were discussing, learning about in the classroom, and how do you think your knowledge and understanding of those historical roots and the deep philosophical ideas behind classical education, how have they been strengthened?
Yeah, so I think so. This first year has been all of the cohort has been involved in all of the classes, so we've had a great environment with that. But the progression through the first year has been really about the philosophy of education, the history of education, and also the humane letters, which is just kind of a pursuit of and a love of literature for its own sake. So that's been kind of continuing in the liberal tradition that I was educated in, but also getting at more specifically the kind of history of education through the ages, through the ancient, medieval, and up through the modern, which is something that I had not had too much experience in before this. So when I kind of look back at this past year, it's I've read a lot of the great books, but I hadn't considered what did education look like in antiquity? What did education look like in the medieval era? Where did these kind of great thinkers and authors that we talk about, what was their education like? That's been something that's been really fruitful for me, looking at the kind of the Greek and the Roman kind of archetypes of education, the foundations, and the kind of medieval synthesis of it all together into the trivium and quadrivium, the liberal arts as we now talk about it today. So I think that's been really the focus of what I've been learning, and something that's just been very fruitful for me to look at kind of the whole picture and to be able to see the different ways and understandings that education as it has been seen in the past, and to be able to think about that specifically more deeply, and not just the kind of particular disciplines of knowledge, but also like the roots of how they're connected and how those come together to produce an education oriented toward virtue, both intellectual and moral.
So one major theme or topic that you've mentioned previously as being of interest is this, what you call major tension between philosophy and rhetoric throughout the Western tradition. So tell us a bit about what you've been considering, what you've been contemplating about that tension.
Yeah, so I think we can kind of see this tension from the very beginning in Athens. We know Socrates, and we kind of think about the educational philosophical sphere in terms of him, but during that period, the kind of ideal product of education was a sort of Pericles, the ideal Athenian orator who was able to speak well, was knowledgeable, and could present himself well and be effective in the kind of public sphere. The ideal being this kalokagathia. It's kind of a combination of the beautiful and the good, speaking well, comporting yourself well, doing all of that. That's sort of the kind of ideal of the rhetorical tradition when we think about it. And that tradition has been really influential throughout all of Western history. Coming right out of kind of that school of thought is the progymnasmata. It's this Greek schooling methods that's really oriented to the rhetorical. It's the doing these rhetorical exercises, imitating those who are worthy of imitation. And we see that kind of continuing on in the East, in the Greek side of things, through the entire existence of the Byzantine Empire. And the West is not bereft of that either. We see in the likes of people like Cicero and Quintilian, Quintilian specifically saying that the ideal orator is not only just a good speaker, but he's knowledgeable in everything and he's perfect in morals. And obviously that's the ideal, but where the goal is to approximate that. And I think when we're thinking about classical education, sometimes we have that kind of really philosophical focus. We think of the kind of medieval scholastic, very didactic sort of type of reasoning. But that has existed alongside the kind of rhetorical tradition always. They've kind of ebbed and flowed of which kind of is more emphasized. But both have always been present, even in thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, right? We think of him as kind of the prime example of maybe the philosophical school. He's very aware of Cicero and Virgil and the kind of Roman oratorical tradition, and is being influenced by that. All of those philosophers, even though in the universities they're having that kind of scholastic education, before that they're going through the kind of humanist school of teaching in the monastery schools. And so both exist alongside each other. And I think when we see like those periods of revival of education, there has to be a kind of synthesis of the two. There has to be a somewhat of a reconciliation with the kind of renewal of the classics, with the Byzantines bringing over some of the ancient Greek works and that renewed focus in the rhetorical. But that never negates the philosophical. All of that is still going on at the same time. And so I think when we're looking at the modern period, we have to be focused on kind of bringing back all the tools and the important aspects of classical education in the past. And that includes the rhetorical side of things, a focus on not just the abstract, but also the particular and the prudential, knowing how to be effective at the right time and to be able to persuade well. I think obviously if we have the rhetorical without the philosophical, we kind of arrive at a sort of relativism where it's just about power dynamics, convincing others in order to kind of gain power, a sort of Machiavellian picture of the world. But if we have the philosophical without the rhetorical, oftentimes I think that kind of leads to an ineffectiveness, a kind of distancing yourself from your community, from the state, from everything. And that's not ideal either. So I think a fruitful synthesis of the two is the ideal that we want to have. And that means investigating the previous rhetorical tradition and trying to revive that as well.
So Ben Boyle with us, student in the Graduate School of Classical Education here at Hillsdale College. That's some weighty stuff. That's some heavy stuff to contemplate and to think about. How does a better understanding of that, how does the work that you've been doing in the graduate school lead to better teachers, better leaders inside these schools, lead to better outcomes and better education for our students? Yeah,
so I think, first of all, I mean, the big thing is just kind of awareness of these things. The classical education movement is booming, and that's partly due to a continual kind of renewal and bringing back these sources and things that have been forgotten. And so this program has really kind of made me more aware of the specifics, and being able to know where to go is a huge starting point. If we're going to be able to continue to grow, we want to have people who are aware of what they're doing, know the kind of the history and the philosophy behind it, and are continuously seeking to improve their own intellectual life and to be able to pursue those things. But also just kind of having that basis, that knowledge of how the disciplines are affecting one another is really important to school leadership, to being able to see the big picture and how all of these things are connecting. Because I think sometimes if we're teaching or really focused in one discipline, we can start to see the world only through the kind of methods of that. If we're a math teacher, we might kind of neglect the humanities to some extent, and vice versa. So in order to prevent that, we need to have that holistic kind of picture of everything, that maybe philosophical view, you could say, being able to kind of stand at the top and be able to see the landscape of the minds, the disciplines, and how they're all interrelated. That's what the program's kind of allowed me to be able to see more clearly through the study of philosophy and history and great thinkers in the great books tradition, to be able to see how they're connected, and to be able to rise up to that synthesis that's kind of stands at the top, that philosophical view, which allows somebody to to look and see how rhetoric and philosophy, how the quadrivium and the trivium, how they all are related and oriented towards truth, which, at its heart is one. It's united. It's not separate and distinct. But we have to be able to have that full picture to be able to understand that.
Looking forward to this second year upcoming at the graduate school and what happens after that. Where do you see your future? What do you think you want to do? And how is the graduate school helping you reach those goals?
Yeah, so for me, I'm very interested in school leadership, potentially administration. And so I think that the graduate program so far has prepared me with that basis of knowledge to be able to work from, right? That's kind of those foundational elements, the philosophy of education, the vision of classical education, which I think a lot of people, you can kind of gain that through experience, but there's something worthwhile to being able to study that intimately and to be able to see that. And so the program so far, I've been blessed to be able to study these things more specifically and be able to kind of contemplate that reality. But in the future, this next year, I'll be continuing on with a little bit more. The program, the students will be selecting courses that kind of fit what they're looking for, and I hope to be able to pursue more of that leadership specific classes to be able to develop that in myself as well. So the goal is obviously to be involved in leadership in these schools, and to be able to have the intellectual and philosophical and eventually the experience necessary to be able to assist in that and to continue on this tradition. So,
Ben Boyle, student in the Graduate School of Classical Education here at Hillsdale College. Ben, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate it. Glad to be here.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.